Chapter 56 Gotham Evening Bell Part 1. Silence echoed in the empty room. Finally, Batman said, "From that day on, everything I've done, everything I've endured, has been for revenge. The law and the trial told me that Joe Scher killed my parents, but I knew that wasn't the case, and I spent years building up my ability to question the outcome. And now, it's time for the Bats to take their revenge." As the somber evening bells of Gotham Cathedral tolled, Batman vanished. The Edwards family's recent unusual activities led Batman, who is constantly monitoring the entire city of Gotham, to discover that before the Edwards brothers rose to power, when they first arrived in Gotham, they were the leaders of the alley where their parents died. But now, the Edward brothers are dead, leaving only their nephew. And if young Edward has offended the Godfather and Falcone is unwilling to let him go, then the Edward family will cease to exist. Batman approached Edward Jr. first. Unlike the Godfather, he didn't need to send someone to fetch him. He could simply appear in the shadows behind anyone. The next day, Gotham was shrouded in a hazy fog again. Later in the evening, the twilight added even more color to the misty fog over Gotham. Schiller was chatting with the priest at the church entrance. He was just like a typical Westerner, entering and leaving the church on time without seeming out of place at all. The priest here was very learned, and he had a profound understanding of theology. Schiller enjoyed discussing philosophical and theological issues with him, and at the same time he could also get some information. The old priest had lived in Gotham his entire life, experienced all of Gotham's eras, and knew all the stories of this place. The priest said, "The dockworkers haven't been coming as often lately. Perhaps their business has improved. I hope so. God tells people that they need to atone for their sins through such hard work. Recently, there have been more merchant ships at the dock, and the cargo ship owners' businesses have improved," Schiller said. "I remember many years ago, there was a time when many laborers liked to come here to pray. The church had never been so lively." The old priest's voice carried the unique marks of his era, like a railway track laid out from history, old and somewhat faded. It was clear that they weren't busy at that time, probably because business wasn't good. Many people were complaining, some were very angry, and some even got into arguments. "I tried my best to dissuade them." "You are a good person," Schiller said. The old priest squinted as he recalled, "In those days, everything was in chaos. I remember that the one who dominated the docks was a man named Leaf. He was not someone to be trifled with. People called him Big Beard, and some called him the Viking pirate. He was tall and strong, with a full beard, and led a dozen or so equally strong men. They were a tyrant at the docks, and no one dared to mess with them. They specialized in collecting protection money from laborers and extorting others. And then what? Who punished them? It was Falcone. His Majesty the Godfather gave him a harsh lesson." The priest stroked his fingers, which were somewhat withered from age, and said, "Originally, the Godfather should have taken over those docks, but somehow, they ended up in the hands of the Edward family." The priest shook his head and said, "I'm not saying the Edward family is bad at managing things, but perhaps if the Falcone family had taken over the docks back then, and the entire East District had been connected as one line, the Falcone family would be much stronger than they are now. I often hear people say," Schiller said, "that the Godfather's control over the East District is somewhat weak, because he only controls some areas in the Northeast and Southeast, while leaving the most important part, the docks, unattended." The priest shook his head and said, "Perhaps he has his own plans." Schiller pondered that what the priest had told him was not a secret, but it was not widely known because few people survived that era. Of course, Schiller speculated that there might be more complex disputes involved in why the Godfather did not take control of the docks all at once. As darkness fell, Schiller bid farewell to the priest and walked out of the church alone. As the last rays of the setting sun sank below the horizon, he heard 7 heavy chimes from the church bell tower above him, the sound carrying an indescribable sense of decay. The priest stood at the church door, made the sign of the cross with his hand, and whispered, "This is a death knell. God grant your soul release." Schiller stood outside the door. He turned around and, through a dark gray haze, saw a black and yellow figure standing on the tall clock tower. On the other side, young Edward collapsed to the ground, facing the shadow with 2 pointed ears. He stammered, I only know that back then, the Godfather ended the chaos at the East Wharf, and my father and uncle wanted a piece of the pie, even if it was just one dock. But suddenly the Godfather didn't want any of them, so our family got all 5 docks. I don't know how that happened. I was too young then, you'll have to ask the Godfather. I really don't know anything. After the bat's shadow left, little Edward trembled as he got up from the ground. He muttered a curse under his breath, and suddenly he saw another shadow appear in front of him. He looked up and saw a huge umbrella pointing at him. Behind the umbrella, a sinister eye was staring at him. Just as Edward was about to scream in terror, his vocal cords and throat were severed. After a soft thud, the sound of a heavy object falling to the ground, accompanied by the lights going out in Edward's old house, everything fell silent. In the end, Batman arrived at Falcone's mansion, which was pitch black and quiet as if no one was there. Unlike Edward's old mansion, which was brightly lit and guarded all night, the mansion where the Godfather of Gotham lived seemed to have no defenses at all, and Batman knew this was abnormal. Finally, Batman met him in Falcone's office, which was still empty. Falcone seemed to have been waiting for him, sitting alone in his office in the early hours of the morning. "I knew you would come," Falcone said. "You weren't careful enough when you investigated old Edward's resume. That means there must be something special about his resume that makes him so interesting to you," Batman said. "Indeed. Would you be interested in hearing a story from many years ago?" Then, Batman learns about the turbulent era he has never seen or heard of from the Godfather who has ruled Gotham for 40 years. They gathered their friends and were ruthless, among whom the Viking pirate Leif was the most powerful. "I know very well that if I want the Falcone family to truly gain a foothold here, I have to take them down. That bearded man made a lot of money through years of extortion or ship ownership. He was resentful and wanted to rebel against me. So, in front of many people, I killed all his family members and then stuffed him into a powder keg. Of course, that scared a lot of people, which made my plan go very smoothly. What I want to know is about Park Street," Batman said. "Don't worry, we'll be there soon." Falcone swiveled his chair, turned to look at Batman and said, "You look a bit like your father." He nodded and said, "Very much so." Before Batman could say anything, Falcone said, "I wiped out all the major powers at the docks back then, but I didn't take over the docks. Instead, I handed them over to the Edward family. This is related to your parents. Your mother was a good woman, a kind lady. She sympathized with the dockworkers and felt that they worked too hard, more than 10 hours a day. Your father agreed. They felt that they should treat the poor people better. So, they forbade the gangsters from oppressing the laborers and created a more relaxed work system for them. They only worked for a few hours and then had to rest, eat something and drink some water. The Wayne family is determined to reform the entire Gotham Pier order, but I know what they're doing is wrong, but I don't want to go against the Wayne family, so I'm withdrawing and leaving them to their own devices. I let the Edward family control all the docks. The Edward brothers were quite clever." Falcone lit a cigar, the faint light illuminating his face. Beneath his sharp brows, dark shadows were cast, enveloping his eyes, and one could still vaguely discern the likeness of the young Godfather who once dominated the world. "So, Edward hired that thug named Joe to kill my parents?" The smoke from the cigar drifted slowly upwards, and Falcone's speech began to slow down, as if the memories were becoming more and more distant and unclear. "You mean the ones who actually did it?" "No, not them, not Edward. The person who actually did the work was a dockworker named Lewis." "Laborers." Batman found it utterly absurd. He asked, "Why? How could they be dockworkers?" "I know you don't understand. The Waynes helped them. Yes, the laborers no longer have to work such long hours every day, oppressed by gangsters and cargo ship owners. They've found their saviors." Falcone shook his head and said, "But you don't understand. There are different classes among the laborers. The most tiring jobs are carrying sandbags and moving heavy objects. In the past, these were done by the lowest-level laborers. The senior workers only did the easier jobs of allocating manpower and counting materials. Your parents want everyone to have an easy life. No one is doing the dirty and hard work. The cargo ship owners are taking too long and losing a lot of cargo. They would rather take a detour than come to Gotham Port again. I remember that Lewis was the chief engineer of the third or fourth dock. He was closely watched by the Wayne family and had to be assigned the same work to everyone. He could only work 9 hours a day, with a 2-hour break in between for them to eat. The cargo ship was just sitting there, and no one was moving the cargo. The fresh produce and fruit on board spoiled, and the shipowner wanted Lewis to pay for it. Lewis couldn't afford it, so he was beaten up by the shipowner and the sailors, and his leg was broken. So, he hired that thug to kill the Wayne couple? Batman's voice was hoarse, as if it had fallen to rock bottom. He turned to old Edward for help, and together they committed the murder on Park Street. You must find it absurd that Judas betrayed his lord and caused his benefactor to suffer, Falcone said. But this is Gotham, a place that even the devil would avoid. Batman closed his eyes. The truth was completely different from what he had imagined. This is not a story of a struggle between perpetrators and innocent people. There is no justice that can be served at a glance. Instead of white walls and black shadows, everything was an old, faded gray videotape, covered in the thick dust of that era. The thugs who did it and the Edward brothers are all dead, but Lewis is still alive. If you still want revenge, go to number 7, the end of Gray Street, east of the church. He lives there. After saying that, Falcone exhaled his last puff of smoke and closed his eyes. His fingers were well maintained, with almost no wrinkles. The cigar between his fingers had burned out, and the flame gradually went out, as if silently drawing a period to that turbulent era, to all the waves of that era. Chapter 57 Gotham Evening Bell, Part 2. In a pitch-black alley, the faint reflection of moving armor intertwined with an even deeper and denser fog. In an instant, the gray mist condensed into a figure, stopping at the end of the alley. The sound of armor rubbing together ceased, and heavy footsteps, stepping on the still wet puddles, made a faint, deathly sound. Death knell. That was indeed your death knell. No sooner had he finished speaking than a flash of light appeared, and Schiller vanished from his spot, reappearing behind the figure. Who is your employer? You don't need to know that. It seems you are very confident in your professional skills. Schiller dodged 2 more darts, then faced the death knell and said, You shouldn't have killed me. I can kill anyone, as long as someone can afford the price. Schiller stretched out his hand, and a flame ignited in it. No matter who your employer is, the price he's paying you is wrong. Deathstroke remained silent for less than a second before turning and leaving. Indeed, goodbye. How would you deal with an employer who cheats on you? It depends. Kill him, I'll pay. You don't have that much money. The world's richest man pays the bill. Goodbye. Schiller watched the armored figure disappear into the distance at the end of Gotham Street in a few breaths. He thought to himself that his enemies were indeed capable, able to hire Deathstroke to kill him. The series of flashes had exhausted Schiller's energy. No car could drive into such a deep alley, so he decided to walk back slowly and call a car to pick him up when he got back to the church. He turned out of a small alley and onto the main street. Then he looked back and noticed some movement at the far end of the street. At this moment, Batman is standing in an incredibly dilapidated, dark, and cramped room. The environment here is terrible. Batman has never been in such an uncomfortable room in his life. This is a 3rd-floor apartment. The windows are all nailed shut, all the outer layers of the walls have peeled off, the room is incredibly damp, the floor is slippery stone tiles, all the furniture is out of place, and the rest of the place is full of all kinds of garbage. The homeowner paused for a moment when he saw Batman, the uninvited guest. Then he lowered his head, looked at his feet, mumbled something indistinctly, turned around with a hunched back, picked up a salt shaker, and tried to hand it to Batman. Batman took the salt shaker. It was empty. There was nothing there. Then the man waved him away, as if to tell him to leave. He was a withered, hunched old man with dark skin, deep-set eyes, a limp, and constantly muttering curses. It seemed the downstairs neighbor heard the noise and poked their head out from under the stairs, saying, What do you want with this old man? Who are you to him? What's wrong with him? What else could it be? Can't you tell? He has Alzheimer's and doesn't recognize anyone at all. Even if you know him, he won't recognize you. From the neighbor's angle, he couldn't see Batman's face, only a vague figure. He said, That old guy couldn't pay his rent. Every time the landlord came, he would give him the salt shaker. Maybe in his time, the salt shaker was still quite valuable, but there was nothing left in that salt shaker a long time ago. But he's also lucky. His landlord seems to have died at the hands of the gang. This attic isn't worth much money. They'd kill him and then collect his body, so he's still alive. No matter who you are, just ignore him. He can only eat the little bit of garbage thrown down from upstairs every day. But his upstairs neighbor moved away a few days ago, so he probably won't live much longer. After he finished speaking, a loud bang came from downstairs. The neighbor had closed the door. Batman, holding the salt shaker, watched as the hunched old man sat down in the chair, staring silently at the table, a drop of saliva dribbling from the corner of his mouth. He saw Lewis's hands. They were very rough. Almost all the knuckles were twisted from years of moving heavy objects, and the veins on the dry palms were clearly visible. "Are you Lewis?" There was no response other than Batman's own voice. "Do you remember Thomas Wayne? Do you remember Martha?" Batman felt his voice trembling. An extreme anger rose in Batman's chest, and he squeezed the salt shaker so hard it creaked. His enemies do not remember all the innocent people he has harmed. He has simply forgotten all his crimes. This wasn't punishment for him. Rather, it allowed him to escape the guilt within himself, Batman thought. He asked Lewis again and again, "Why don't you remember anything? You really don't remember the surname Wayne? What about Edward? What about Falcone?" Just as Batman uttered the surname Falcone, the aging Lewis suddenly let out a strange scream, his mouth wide open, his long dormant jaw making a cracking sound. He trembled violently as he fell off the chair, screaming incessantly and throwing anything he could grab at Batman, tears, snot, and saliva streaming down his face. Batman saw endless fear on his face. Batman thought that Falcone hadn't lied to him. When he killed Leaf, it had indeed terrified many people. This includes Lewis. Schiller walked to the middle of the alley and looked up. Only one room on the third floor was lit, and inside was a dark figure with pointed ears. He stood downstairs and waited for a while. When he saw Batman come out, Batman was also a little surprised to see Schiller, but his mind was a bit sluggish at the moment. Schiller looked Batman over and found that he was uninjured and showed no signs of fighting. Then his gaze fell on the salt shaker in Batman's hand. Schiller didn't know what it was, but clearly, Batman, who was feeling complicated, needed to confide in someone. So before Schiller could even ask, Batman told the whole story. They walked and talked, and as they passed the church, it was almost dawn. Batman, holding the salt shaker, said, "He doesn't remember any of this." When Batman said this, he was no longer angry. A complex emotion was contained in his tone. "You said he still remembers someone." "Yes, he still remembers Falcone." "Why does he remember Falcone but not Wayne?" Schiller sighed, looked into the distance, and said, "Because of fear. Because fear is the deepest and most difficult scar to erase from the human soul." "He forgot everything except fear, didn't he?" Batman said. "It was the darkest hour before dawn, and the dense darkness almost swallowed everything. All the buildings were shrouded in shadow, their outlines obscured. Soon, what jolted Batman out of his thoughts was the heavy tolling of the Gotham Cathedral bells. The dull sound carried far and wide, its sound waves penetrating as deeply as the darkness itself, and even in the darkest and most gloomy alleyways, the tremor could be felt. Batman thought, fear, fear. If he can no longer exact his true revenge on the people and events of that era, if the murderer he desperately sought to catch, the person he wanted to take revenge on, has completely forgotten all of this, leaving his anger and hatred to go to waste, he at least reminded Batman of one thing. Sometimes, what's more terrifying than death is the lingering fear. In that case, Batman thought, he would become a dark knight who would bring endless fear to all the criminals in Gotham. Years ago, his parents died along with bats that streaked across the sky in shadows. Years later, he will eventually bring the fear of bats to all the criminals in this city, like the Gotham Evening Bell, which seeps into every street and every dark corner. Chapter 58: The World in the Ring. Later, go and give this report to Mrs. Felton in the registrar's office. Of course, matters related to the club can be organized after the final exams. I don't think the students have much free time to deal with these things right now. Evans nodded, holding the documents in his hands, and said, "Indeed, almost everyone is studying very hard. Even those who used to skip classes are now frequently going to the library." Schiller rummaged through his desk, then handed him a stack of papers, saying, "Although I told you the whole book is important, I think with your current level, memorizing the entire book is a pipe dream. This is the scope of the research paper. Have them finish reading it as soon as possible." Just then, Bruce knocked on the door and Evans said, "Then I won't bother you any longer, Professor. I'll arrange everything as soon as possible." After Bruce came in, he naturally found a chair and sat down. Schiller, while tidying up the textbooks on the table, asked him, "Have you finished reviewing everything?" "Of course, that's not a lot." Bruce was quite proud of his intelligence and memory. "You'd better make sure your paper passes, or I'll give it to your butler." "What's his name again?" Professor Alfred. My butler is named Alfred." "Oh, right. If you fail this exam, I'll call your butler, Alfred." Bruce paused for a moment and then said, "Okay, Could you give me some more information? He had a subtle feeling that Schiller's matter-of-fact attitude of calling the parents made him feel like he was being treated like a little kid. He felt a little resentful, but when he imagined the scenario, Bruce thought he should go back and read some more books. What are your plans for the holiday? I have a lot to do, you know that. What are you planning to do? Yesterday, the attending physician at Arkham Psychiatric Hospital called me. We are old classmates. He was a bit overwhelmed and invited me to come and help. I plan to take 2 students there for their internship. Oh? So who are you planning to bring? I've already spoken to Falcone. Evans is definitely going. He's doing very well and is currently first in his class. As for the other one, I haven't decided yet. Before Bruce could speak, Schiller said, But it's definitely not you anyway. Your grades are terrible. Bruce pursed his lips and said, Things at the East Wharf haven't calmed down yet. Without the Edward family, things are a bit chaotic there. I've been very busy at night lately, and so has Gordon. I bet you're busy with more than just your heroic deeds tonight. How's that heart-stealing thief doing? Bruce said, I've been busy with my partner's career lately. Serena's good friend Maggie hasn't been feeling well lately, so she hasn't been out and about. However, Bruce smiled and said, Our righteous lawyer, Mr. Harvey, seems to be making some moves. Schiller raised an eyebrow and said, He would fall for a girl from Gotham? That's really strange. Who has such charm? Christine, it's Christine. That cheerleader leader? But isn't she a Batman fan? The old headmaster was imprisoned again because Harvey helped Christine testify against him again. And this time, because of Harvey's defense, the old headmaster had no excuse for medical parole or anything like that. He was sentenced to 137 years and probably will never come out. You know, how could someone who speaks eloquently and displays great prowess in court not earn a girl's gratitude and admiration? Schiller touched his brow and said, TSK. Our lawyer is really lucky with women. After Bruce left, Schiller returned to his apartment building, still thinking about Green Lantern in his mind. He's very experienced in this situation because the current Green Lantern is exactly like Spider-Man when he first gained his superpowers. Clearly, he had obtained the green light ring from that alien. Compared to Peter, Hal is more mature. After all, he is older and has a pilot's license. His mental fortitude is much better than that of the high school Spider-Man. So even though he was excitedly chatting with netizens, he didn't reveal anything about aliens or the magic ring. Schiller chatted with him for a while, then clicked on his profile picture and discovered that Green Lantern's abilities could indeed be copied. Schiller clicked copy, but this time it was delayed for a long time, and the system notification sound did not come. After a while, he suddenly noticed that the symbiote in his brain was emitting a slight buzzing sound. He called out to the symbiote several times, but there was no response. After a while, the system finally issued a notification. The world within the ring has been loaded. Just as Schiller was completely baffled, the symbiote suddenly sent out a series of excited brainwaves. Then Schiller felt something on his finger. He looked down and saw it was an antique silver-gray ring. Schiller found it very strange. The system's ability to copy should not be able to copy external objects, and even if it copied Green Lantern's Green Lantern ring, it should be green. Why did it turn gray? Then, the symbiont provided Schiller with the answer. Green Lantern is a very special hero. Most of his abilities come from the Green Lantern ring, including the ability to create green energy weapons, the force field of green energy, teleportation, and healing. These are all special abilities that the Green Lantern ring grants him. Therefore, the abilities belonging to Green Lantern that the system copied must also have a carrier. Schiller didn't have a green light ring, so the system turned the symbiote Greyfog into a vessel for this ability. So the vessel is you. Then what is the purpose of this ring? It's not very useful, but it looks nice, the symbiote said. Okay, Schiller said. He glanced at his finger. The ring was actually quite simple, just a silver-gray band with a pattern of wavy lines. It didn't look out of place. The only odd thing was that it was worn on his ring finger. So how do you use this ability? Schiller asked the symbiote. Think about it in your head. Schiller closed his eyes and concentrated. Soon, he noticed a gray mist appearing in his dark vision. The mist gradually expanded, and after a moment of white light, his consciousness appeared on an island shrouded in gray mist. The island was small. You could see its end as far as the eye could see. Schiller controlled his vision to fly to the edge of the island and then look down. Below the island lies a vast, boundless city. The island and the city were still shrouded in layers of hazy gray mist. The city was unbelievably large, and all the buildings in the mist took on bizarre shapes. Every now and then, huge creatures whose specific shapes could not be seen would move through the city. This is an isolated island floating above a huge city. Schiller begins to recall the world within the Green Lantern Ring. In the comics, the Green Lantern Ring contains a separate world inside, where Green Lantern shrunk his enemies and imprisoned them. He himself was also once trapped in the Emerald Dunes within the Green Lantern Ring's inner world. Even the Green Lantern Ring's owner doesn't seem to be able to fully control their inner world. Like Schiller now, his consciousness can only remain within the confines of this isolated island, while the enormous city below, whose details are indistinct, is completely beyond his control. Fortunately, the isolated island seemed to have no connection with the city below, and the huge shadows that suddenly appeared in the fog did not notice that something had appeared above their heads. Moreover, Schiller was surprised to find that he seemed to have physically entered this world, and that he could communicate with the symbiote just the same way. He severed his consciousness, returned to reality, looked up at the clock, and saw that time was flowing. In other words, it is equivalent to an independent shelter. Theoretically, if he encounters an insurmountable danger, he can directly enter the gray fog world and wait for the crisis to pass. Schiller thought that the enormous city beneath that isolated island, and those massive figures appearing and disappearing in the gray fog, must surely conceal a great secret and be equally dangerous. Staying there too long wouldn't be a good idea. Unless faced with a life-threatening danger, it was best to avoid this strange and bizarre world within the ring. Later that evening, Mrs. Felton from the registrar's office came over. She had originally come to check the textbook fees for the next semester with Schiller, but she was a very helpful lady. She told Schiller, "Our new principal was just discharged from the hospital yesterday, and he may be back in his office tomorrow." She subtly reminded Schiller, "He seems a bit anxious. He might be planning something big." Just as Mrs. Felton said, Schiller received a call from Headmaster Selden that very evening. This time, Selden seemed to have learned his lesson. He didn't press Schiller to complete any tasks as aggressively as he had at the beginning. Instead, he gave Schiller a bunch of empty words about doing his job well, and finally told him that some professorships at Gotham University might be changing recently. He invited some old friends he had met at Princeton to introduce him to experts and professors to form a new faculty at Gotham University. He seemed to be trying to make Schiller nervous, since in universities, the resources a professor has depend on the school's emphasis on their subject. Schiller is indeed a golden brand for Gotham University now, with an impressive resume. Some students from other places even apply to Gotham University specifically because of this professor. However, if more world-class experts and scholars join the university and establish their own laboratories to lead students in researching world-class topics, it's hard to say whether the university's resources will still be so heavily allocated to psychology. Schiller originally had no objection to this matter. After all, he also hoped that Gotham University would be better, adding luster to his teaching resume, until he saw Victor Frith's name on the list of professors newly hired by the headmaster of Selden. Chapter 59 First Encounter with Mr. Freeze. The new headmaster, Selden, was actually quite capable and experienced, with a wide network of connections. His only problem was that he was incredibly unlucky. No, perhaps it should be said that it's very bad. His friends nominated a total of 6 professors for him, one of whom happened to be one of Gotham's future villains, Mr. Freeze Victor Frith. After reviewing their files, Selden decided to hire 3 of them, including Victor Frith, the Mr. Freeze. After the invitations were sent out, only one professor accepted the offer from Gotham University, and that was none other than Mr. Freeze, Victor Frith. Gotham University has had a truly unfortunate history. It had just subdued a few monsters and captured a few more demons. It had just lost Jonathan the Scarecrow, and then came Victor the Freeze. Moreover, Victor seemed to desperately need the job. Before Schiller could even communicate with Bruce to stop Selden's offer, the invitation had just been sent out the day before, and by the afternoon of the next day, Victor was already at Gotham University. It was as if he would starve if he didn't take the job. Fortunately, just like the Scarecrow, Victor is now just an ordinary scholar and professor. Schiller knew that even Mr. Freeze, who came later, was one of the more mild-mannered villains in Gotham. He usually liked to freeze Batman and then talk to him about philosophy and art. Most of his obsession and madness came from his love for his wife, rather than from his desire to oppose Batman or Gotham. Schiller met Victor, who resembled himself. Both were typical scholars. Victor was tall and wore glasses. His suit collar and cuffs were neatly trimmed. Although he looked somewhat haggard, he still appeared to be a learned professor. Each professor has their own private office, But there are also communal offices where everyone sits together to chat and socialize. After Jonathan left, his communal office became vacant. When Victor came, he happened to sit in Jonathan's old spot next to Schiller. During their first conversation, Schiller noticed that Victor's gaze was fixed somewhat absently on the ring on Schiller's ring finger. After a while, he finally steered the conversation towards family, asking, "You seem to be married. Is your wife in Gotham now?" In Western countries, it is considered impolite to discuss someone's marital status on the first meeting, as some people may feel that it violates their privacy. It's clear that Victor isn't in a good mental state right now. He seems very anxious and desperately wants to seek validation. Schiller was taken aback when he heard the question. He didn't know how to answer. He couldn't very well tell the other person that he had a symbiote that had watched too many TV dramas. Could he? Schiller's silence was interpreted by Victor in another way. That's human nature. When feeling insecure and extremely anxious, people unconsciously seek out others like themselves, looking for comfort in those who share similar experiences. Victor thought of Schiller's somewhat astonishing resume and wondered if there might be an even more tragic love story among those thrilling detective tales. With this sense of shared fate, Victor and Schiller quickly became acquainted. In subsequent conversations, Schiller discovered that he and Victor did indeed have a lot in common. Victor's favorite topics of conversation were ancient philosophy, modern art, and religious art, while Schiller also enjoyed theology and philosophy. The two had a lot in common and could even chat for an entire afternoon when they didn't have classes. Schiller never expected that the first close friend he found after transmigrating would be the villain Mr. Freeze. However, it must be said that Mr. Freeze, who has not yet become a villain, is actually very charismatic. He is always gentle and refined, has a strong sense of empathy, speaks in a gentle and organized manner, and has unique insights when discussing certain issues. Chatting with him reminds Schiller of his debates with experts in the same field in his previous life, which always sparked countless intellectual insights. This moderate villain makes a pretty good impression, a fact acknowledged by everyone in the office. As Schiller's conversation with Victor deepened, he learned about Victor's current situation. Victor had used cryogenics to preserve his wife, but this technology was very expensive and required a demanding environment. The research institute that originally funded his research was no longer willing to provide Victor with a site due to insufficient funds. That's why Victor rushed to Gotham University. Besides the decent salary, he also came to the Wayne family to build a cryogenic laboratory there, where he could ensure that his wife remained in a frozen state and that her condition would not worsen. If we consider the later part of Mr. Freeze's story, his behavior might seem a bit perverse, but in reality, most of Victor's colleagues in the office can understand him. In that era, many people proposed the theory of freezing people with incurable diseases and treating them when medical technology advances. Victor was merely one of the pioneers. Schiller believed that Victor Frith, even without the experimental accident that turned him into Mr. Freeze, would have been a very reliable ally. Compared to the still-developing baby bat, the cryogenically frozen man, with his cutting-edge cryogenic technology and vast knowledge, seems more reliable. To permanently solve Mr. Freezing's problems, he must first address his wife's degenerative disease. Schiller accompanied Victor to see the cryogenic chamber where his wife was stored. Mrs. Frith was not very beautiful. She was just an ordinary white woman, but Victor's eyes were always full of love when he looked at her. Schiller asked the symbiote in his mind, "Is there a way?" The symbiote said, "The nerves have atrophied, which is a problem." Victor looked at the cryogenic chamber and said, "My wife's neurodegenerative disease is almost incurable. Her nerve cells are dying too quickly. I only had time to seal her in, but it's irreversible. Even if I could barely control the cell death, the immune inflammation would damage her brain." Victor crouched down, and anyone could hear the despair in his voice. Perhaps he himself knew that freezing his wife and waiting for a solution that might never come was just self-deception. Schiller frowned as he pondered. He thought that although Victor was one of Gotham's most notable villains and indeed a world-class cryophysicist, professional matters should be left to professionals, such as a top-notch neurosurgeon. The next day, Schiller returned to Marvel's New York. When Strange met Schiller in his own home, he threw his coat, which he had just taken off, onto the sidewalk and said, "Good heavens, you just swagger into my house like that. I haven't settled accounts with you yet, but you sold my information to some organization. That's what they asked me. There's nothing I can do about it." During the standoff with Schiller, Strange had no choice but to back down, saying, "Fine, but you can't expect me to be a trained agent who doesn't say anything, especially since you were the one who threatened me first. Let's not talk about that anymore. I have a way to make money." Would you like to hear about it? Strange asked with considerable suspicion. A way to get rich? If there really was such a way, why would you come to me? I heard you offered Stark $1 million an hour for consultations, and he actually agreed. When I heard this news, I wished I could go back to university and study psychology. Now, there is a lady who has a very serious neurodegenerative disease, and her husband may have a unique low-temperature patent technology in the world. You know, the kind of technology that can make him live off the patent fees for a lifetime. If you can cure this lady's illness, then we can share this patent together. Strange pursed his lips, sighed, and said, I'll say it again. I'm a doctor, not God. Do you think you can't cure this disease? But first, shouldn't you let me see the patient instead of you, the middleman? For some reason, you probably won't be able to see her, but I have all of her pathology records here. As he spoke, Schiller conjured a large pile of papers out of thin air. Strange took them, glanced at them briefly, and then shook his head, saying, Impossible. Can't be saved. Give up. Before Schiller could speak, Strange said, This is no longer a matter of neuroscience. If you want her to fully recover, it's almost like turning a piece of baked bacon back into a pig. He then looked Schiller up and down, finally fixing his gaze on the ring on his ring finger. Strange said, Well, I was a bit too absolute just now. You could go find someone else, though I don't think there's a better neurosurgeon in the world than me. What if you teamed up with Stark? Strange was about to deny it, but after thinking about it, he said, That Stark may have some research in mechanics, but if he wants to apply his technology to neurosurgery, he still needs a lot of research and modification. If you can convince him to put in so much effort to research this technology, then I can give it a try. But you'd better prepare a consultation fee that satisfies me. Before Strange could finish speaking, Schiller had already vanished. Recalling the ring he had seen on Schiller's hand and Schiller's attitude, Strange had clearly misunderstood something. He sighed and muttered to himself, Ha! Love! How foolish! Schiller, who suddenly appeared behind Stark, startled him. He then shouted, I know you have this amazing magic, but that's no excuse for walking up 30 stories without an elevator. Aren't you afraid of getting stuck in the wall? Schiller said, What nonsense are you talking about? How could a magical teleportation spell get stuck in a wall? That's just too stupid. I hope I won't one day get a call from a maintenance worker telling me that there's a human-shaped hole in one of the walls of Stark Tower. All right, I've come to see you because I have something important to discuss. Schiller then pulled out that huge pile of documents. A dozen minutes later, Stark said, Actually, you've come to the right person. I have some knowledge of neurology. He walked around the table with a pen in hand, saying as he went, Last time I got a lot of biomechanical data from Obadiah's database, which included some technologies for modifying the nervous system to adapt to mechanical control. Although these technologies are very dangerous, it cannot be denied that if successful, they will allow the human body to control mechs with unprecedented precision. If machines can receive commands directly from the central nervous system, then all the time required for secondary operations will be eliminated, and all armors can truly achieve intuitive and responsive control. So you can do it? No, not yet. Obadiah's research on this technology has also reached a bottleneck. There is a key technological hurdle that needs to be overcome, and we don't have any ideas yet. Chapter 60 Early Winter Daily Life Part 1. The weather in New York is much better than in Gotham. Even though it's winter, the weather is still very sunny. From the window on the third floor of the clinic, you can clearly see the bustling traffic on the highway on the other side of the skyline. Schiller was up very early. Pikachu pushed the door open with his little arms, then stretched and said, Your damn old-fashioned kettle is making such a loud noise. Yawn, where did you get such an antique? Schiller walked down the stairs, and Pikachu slid down the handrail to the second-floor restaurant, where a kettle was steaming and occasionally making a sharp chirping sound. Schiller used magic to float the kettle to the surface and place it on the table. Then, with a wave of his hand, a frying pan flew over. He poured some olive oil on it and began to make breakfast. Pikachu slammed the refrigerator door open, scurried inside, and rummaged through the food, complaining as it did so, I should have thrown away all that damn blue cheese. It stinks. Oh. And this damn lettuce, it tastes like chewing on plastic. Let me see. Here it is. My cheddar cheese. Put it in my breakfast sandwich later. And this can of my favorite luncheon meat. Cut it up and put it in the middle, remember, make sure it's cut thick. Just then, the clinic's downstairs door opened, and Schiller heard Peter's voice accompanied by footsteps coming up the stairs. Sir, I'm here. I borrowed a toolbox from my uncle. I'm sure I can fix that damn circuit breaker today. As he approached, the open refrigerator door blocked his view. He casually slammed the door shut, followed by a loud bang and a scream. Ouch! Shit! My back! Peter hurriedly opened the refrigerator door again and found the furry Pikachu clinging to the refrigerator shelf. His waist bumped into the lid of a jar on the refrigerator door. Peter lifted him off the ground and said, "You still have a waist? Where is it? Hey kid, don't force me to expose you. Yesterday it wasn't some broken circuit breaker. It was you who died 30 lives and still couldn't beat the game." Peter quickly covered Pikachu's mouth and, trying to make conversation, asked, "Dr. Schiller, what did you make? It smells so good. A regular fried sandwich. If you want one, I'll make you a large one." "Okay, but it doesn't need to be too big. My appetite has decreased recently." "That's great news," Schiller said while frying an egg. "At least your aunt won't have to cook for you every day until her wrists hurt." As Peter chatted with Schiller, he noticed the ring on Schiller's ring finger. Pikachu noticed the subtle change in Peter's expression, looked around, and then said, "We still have yesterday's game cartridge in our hand. Want to play another round?" Peter was confused, but when Pikachu flicked its tail and pointed its fluffy, lightning-shaped tail downstairs, Peter understood and immediately followed Pikachu downstairs. After a while, the two returned, whispering to each other. Pikachu jumped onto the stove and looked at Schiller. Schiller was flipping the golden-brown fried egg over with a spatula when Peter winked at Pikachu from behind. Pikachu wrinkled its nose and said, "Well, okay. I guess it's hard work for you to cook for us. How about we eat out?" Schiller looked at him with great surprise and said, "Did the sun rise in the west today? Usually at this time you would just tell me to fry the eggs a little less. I mean, well, it's nothing, but I always feel that you humans shouldn't keep everything bottled up inside. It's bad for your health. I'm a psychologist. I know this better than you do. Otherwise, who would I be making money from?" Schiller said. Pikachu flicked its tail, and just as it was about to say something more, Peter scooped it up and chuckled twice, saying, "Ha-ha, doctor, let's go play some games first, and we'll come back to help you later." Pikachu lashed Peter's face with its tail in retaliation for bumping into his waist. Peter, not to be outdone, grabbed Pikachu's ears and swung them around. The two of them went downstairs, playfully fighting. Schiller felt somewhat bewildered. He had a feeling that Peter was hiding something from him. A while later, Steve, who had just finished his morning run, came in. He wiped his sweat with a towel and then followed the scent up to the second floor. He said, "The structure of this old house is so illogical. The kitchen is on the second floor. I'm grateful I still have the money to buy a good range hood," Schiller said. "Then you should thank Nick too. He's given you plenty of bonuses, hasn't he?" "What? Under what pretext did he give you a bonus this time? How much did you actually receive? 30% or 20%? Not counting taxes, it's only 18%, Steve said with a shrug. His understanding of the economics of additional income distribution is becoming increasingly macro-level. Steve draped the towel over the railing, then casually opened the refrigerator and said, "Let me see. Where's the steak I put here last time? Oh, it's here, about half left. I think I can make a beef and cheeseburger. And the cheese? I remember there was half a piece left last time. Stop looking. Have you forgotten I have a mouse here that looks just like Jerry? What cheese can survive the next day, besides blue cheese? My God, that's almost 2 pounds of cheese, and he ate it all? Not a single piece left. No, not just him. Peter made a margarita pizza last time and put in at least a pound of it." Steve shook his head, closed the refrigerator door and said, "Young people these days really don't know how to save money. Are there any good convenience stores in Hell's Kitchen? I can go buy some cheese slices. Go out and turn right, walk 2 streets straight to Mrs. Helena's place. Of course, you'd better just say you're going to buy cheese. Otherwise, she might think you're there for a job interview." "Apply for a job? In this godforsaken place, what kind of job is there that requires an application?" "Of course, Mrs. Helena owns 3 strip clubs, and they're very popular. She probably likes your type the most." Steve pursed his lips and said, "I'll take a detour and buy it after I leave Hell's Kitchen." Then he walked over and patted Schiller on the shoulder, saying, "Hey, I know you're a doctor, but doctors are just ordinary people, and psychologists aren't omnipotent. If you have anything you want to talk about, you can come to me. We're friends." After saying that, he turned and left, leaving Schiller completely baffled. He had only gotten up in the morning to make breakfast and fry an egg. So why was everyone acting so strangely? Not long after Steve left, Stark flew in through the window, wearing his armor and carrying a huge pile of documents. The cold wind from his armor howled into the psychiatric clinic room. Schiller turned his head and was startled by Stark's dark circles. He said, "What the hell? What happened to you?" "Oh, could it be? Miss Pepper took the day off today." "What are you talking about? I spent the whole night doing research on the data you brought yesterday." After saying that, he put the huge pile of documents on Schiller's desk and said, "There has been almost no progress in neurointervention technology. Uncle Obadiah is still in a coma, and I can't ask him. But I've come up with another way." Iron Man, still wearing his armor, pointed to a section of the document with his metal-covered gauntlet and said, "If aging nerves and dead nerve cells cannot be restored, then we'll find a way to replace them mechanically, just like replacing a heart. I don't need you to explain the principles to me. I just want to know how feasible it is." Stark crossed his arms and stared at the images. He said, "You have to understand, even if I'm a genius, I can't conjure technology out of thin air. More importantly, even if I master this technology, it still has to undergo extensive safety testing before it can be put into use." Stark glanced at the ring on Schiller's finger, touched his lips, and said, "If you really need it urgently, I can convene a neuroscience consultation in the name of Stark Industries. We can get the world's most renowned neuroscience research experts to the table. Of course, you'd better bring the patient over. Otherwise, they can't conjure up a solution out of thin air." "That's probably difficult," Schiller said. He is telling the truth. Putting aside how he could bring DC characters to Marvel, even if he could, the timelines of the two worlds are not the same, which could cause many problems and potentially create great risks. Schiller knew very well that, unlike in Marvel, he had a most important mission in the DC universe: to get rid of his enemies. His enemies were no ordinary people. First of all, he was able to hire Deathstroke to kill him. The words Deathstroke left behind before he left already revealed enough information. When Schiller wanted to pay him to kill the employer, Deathstroke's first reaction was, "You can't afford that price." When Schiller further probed by suggesting that the world's richest man would pay for it, Deathstroke still left without hesitation, indicating that he judged that even with a sufficient price, it was not worth his complete defection. The fact that Deathstroke, one of the world's top mercenaries, could make such a judgment speaks volumes. It seems that the original owner was involved in more than just a simple conflict of interest. There must be a much larger conspiracy behind it. Therefore, Schiller hoped that Victor could become his ally to make up for his lack of expertise in engineering and mechanics. So he was willing to help Victor's wife as much as possible to prevent Victor from becoming a cryogenically frozen person. But this did not mean that he had to take a huge risk to take people between the two worlds. Moreover, this does not fundamentally solve the problem. If DC's experts and scholars cannot cure this disease, then Marvel's ordinary experts probably cannot either. Schiller remained silent as he pondered, but Stark finally couldn't hold back any longer and said, Is she all right? Right? Schiller said, "What?" Stark touched his temple with some embarrassment, then said, "I heard from Coulson that your wife's condition isn't good." Schiller was stunned. Where did this rumor come from? He didn't have a wife. He wondered why everyone's attitude was so strange today. Soon, he remembered the first person he met after returning to Marvel, the future Doctor Strange, now a neurologist Strange. "He's such a clever little devil," Schiller said viciously to the symbiote in his mind. "Next time, remember to eat Strange's brain. He's useless anyway."